Today at the National Press Club, Taiwan's first digital minister, Audrey Tang, and the founder of RadicalxChange, Glen Weyl. They'll speak about the groundbreaking work they're doing to try and combat polarisation, misinformation and political apathy online. Here's Audrey Tang and Glen Weyl with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club and today's Westpac address. My name is Andrew Tillett and I'm the Defence and Foreign Affairs Correspondent for the Australian Financial Review and the Vice President here at the club. Our guests today are Taiwan's former Digital Affairs Minister Audrey Tang and economist and founder of RadicalxChange Glen Weyl. Computers and technology dominate our lives. Even as I stand here I can feel someone pinging my iPhone as we speak. We're slaves to our smartphones and apps help keep us entertained and informed, booking flights and watch our weight. Barriers that once existed, geographic, economic and cultural, are being rapidly pulled down. But increasingly there is a dark side to technology. Bullying, peer pressure and disinformation is rife on social media. At times it feels like we speak at each other rather than to each other on platforms. Criminals are exploiting tech to steal money and identities, share horrible content or plan crimes. And authoritarian states, we have been warned, have burrowed their way into our critical infrastructure. Both Audrey and Glen are leaders in the tech sector and committed to digital democracy. In this time of cynicism and disillusionment with mainstream politics, it's an honourable goal. They are visiting Australia here as guests of Per Capita and its Centre of Public Square Initiative. We have lots to talk about today, and you can follow today's conversation at Press Club Aust or hashtag NPC. So please, everyone, welcome Audrey Tang and Glen Weyl for what should be a lovely discussion.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction and for having us. Before I start, I just wanted to acknowledge that this is Ngunnawal country and that we are all meeting here on Ngunnawal, in Ngunnawal country, and that I pay my respects to the elders present and emerging. And I come from Palo Alto, California, from the heart of Silicon Valley. And when I graduated from college and with my PhD, it was a moment when I was trained as a financial economist, as Andrew mentioned, but it was a moment when the financial industry was in the process of blowing up the world. And I returned to my roots. I found a career in the technology industry, and it was a very hopeful time to be doing it. President Obama was just coming into office. Everyone was talking about how to use technology to enhance democracy. Google and Facebook were hopes for people around the world. And we were seeing waves of democratic and justice movements in the Arab Spring, in the Occupy movements, in the Israeli movements for social justice, movements that came all around the world to South America, etc., all with great hope. But in 2016, it started to feel like maybe this wasn't all going in the direction we had all hoped, that things might get quite divisive, quite fractious, quite frightening for the future of democracy in the West. And so I turned away from my career. I started to write for the public about issues of democracy. And I started to seek around the world for an example of how it might be possible to do things better. And when my last book came out, I had the pleasure of being introduced to then Minister Tang, who stepped down a few months ago. We started to work together in Taiwan on how you could use technology to bring people closer to their governments, to help make societies work better, how to hold up and strengthen democracy. And I had the honor of watching up close over the coming years how Taiwan was able to harness the energy in civil society to remake government, how to bring in the innovations from civil society to have the world's lowest death rate during the COVID crisis, second highest economic growth rate without any lockdowns, how they were able to also address imports from across the straits that were not biological but informational in nature, that attacked their information ecosystem more intensely than anywhere else in the world, and yet how they were, in the face of all that, able to use civic participation, able to energize students in their digital competence education to have the freest and fairest election in the world, according to many analyses, this January. Over the course of that decade, from 2014, when they had their own Occupy movement, one of the most intense in the world, where they occupied the national legislature, not for 3 hours as in the United States in 2021, but for 3 weeks. And yet how they took that not as a point to fracture the country, but instead as the launching pad for a movement that brought it together, that they peacefully resolved that conflict with demands generated through technologies that were able to resolve the conflict. And it was so successful that Audrey was appointed a minister, and they moved from 9% trust in government and elected officials during that movement to today around 60% trust in those institutions, by harnessing digital tools not as energy to sell advertisements, but instead as energy to come up with policy directions and laws, passing dozens of laws crowdsourced from the society and bubbling up into the public sector with the help and participation of civil servants across the government. And that's why I decided to really devote my life to telling the story of what they've accomplished there, to writing a book with Audrey, to becoming executive producer of a film that comes out next month about her life. And we have now, since May 20th, when the trailer came out, I went on sabbatical from Microsoft, and Audrey stepped down from her role to tell this story to the rest of the world. We've now visited 21 countries in the last 3 months, and we have had an incredible experience of seeing what this can inspire in people around the world, the way that it can offer a platform to empower them to remake their own digital futures. We've seen that on the same day our book came out, unbeknownst to us, a best-selling British author published a novelization of the same ideas, talking about how they could transform British politics. We've seen best-selling, world-leading actors like Joseph Gordon-Levitt and directors making a series of films about the inspiration that they've taken from these things. We've seen museums, like in Japan's Muraikon, building exhibits and cultural engagements around these ideas. We've seen people running for elected office, people who've never participated in politics before, in the course of 1 month, becoming the most popular platform in the Tokyo gubernatorial election by harnessing the power of technology used right to connect citizens and build consensus. We've been particularly delighted here in Australia by all of the talent and energy and interest that there is across the civil service, across politics, across culture and society for making a new democratic future together with friends and allies throughout Free Asia. And the person who's made this all possible, the person who's changed my life, is the first non-binary minister in the world, and Taiwan's first digital minister, Audrey Tang. And I really am looking forward to you all having the privilege that I've had over the last 5 years of learning from all that she has to give. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that introduction remarks there, Glenn. Audrey, as Glenn sort of alluded to, your backstory as a part of that occupation of the Taiwanese Parliament. You were a teenage hacker at the time. I guess probably, like any parent, what were you thinking?
Well, I was 33, so in 2014.
Teenage in spirit.
Yeah, teen spirit, I guess. Yeah. At the time it was 500,000 on the street and many more online. And I brought like internet cables, and along with a movement called G0V or Gov0, we systemically empowered the civil society organizations, 20 of them, around the occupied parliament, each deliberating about one specific aspect of the cross-strait service and trade deal. So for example, there's one corner deliberating about the then very new 4G infrastructure and the effect of Huawei and ZTE would have on that particular segment. There's corners talking about labor, about environment, and things like that. And unlike many other occupies, which diverged over time, we systemically worked with facilitators of nonviolent communication, dynamic facilitation, open space technology, and so on, and also lifted their voices online through live streaming. And then so every day we inch closer a little bit to the uncommon ground that wasn't there when the day began. But when the day ended, we were able to record something that people across different ideologies could somehow bridge across and agree. And after 3 weeks of this process, we cohered to something that sounds like people can live with. And then the Speaker of the Parliament at the time, Wang Jinping, simply said, okay, now let's go with it. You can go home now, basically. So it's one of the very rare Occupy that, thanks to the facilitative technologies, really converged over time.
And why did the, without sort of spoiling your documentary, but why did the government react the way it did? I mean, it could have sent, you know, the police in or tanks or something like that. And to put down this sort of activity, but it didn't. Why?
Well, when the students first broke into the parliament, there was no one there, no police, and police was summoned immediately, but at that time already live streaming started. And so people who saw the live stream went to the parliament, counter-surrounded the police, asking police to not advance, otherwise the counter-surrounding would advance. And we were there to ensure that the entire nation sees that it is truly, thoroughly nonviolent. That when some of the more antisocial corner of social media try to portray the occupiers as, you know, mobs or whatever, we have real-time, non-stop live stream to show that none of that has taken place. So by thoroughly committing to the nonviolent principle, did we gain the legitimacy saying we're not really protesters only, which is only against something, but also demonstrators, which are for demonstrating a demo of how this trade deal could have been deliberated with the people. And so I think it is this demonstration, not just protest idea, that then stopped, right, the police from advancing, because they're there to keep order and keep the civilized discourse, but we're also there to keep order and civilized discourse.
Yeah. And I guess it was a case of ultimately you becoming a poacher turned gamekeeper, because they offered you a job out of it.
Yeah, at the end of 2014, end of that year, as Glenn mentioned, the trust level was at 9%. And so there was a mayoral election at the end of that year. And all the mayors that did promise open government, civic participation, transparency, participatory budgeting got elected, sometimes surprising to even themselves. And all the mayoral candidates that did not promise these did not get elected. And so at the end of that year, there was a shuffle of the cabinet a little bit. But more importantly, there's a system instilled at the end of the year called youth advisor to the cabinet, or reverse mentors, so that cabinet members each sought people younger than 35 to join the cabinet, to shadow them a bit, and also advise on ways to engage with the people. So I was invited then, when I was 33, as a reverse mentor of this sort, to work on the national curriculum, to work on civil conversations, to bring UberX to the country without tearing apart the taxi unions versus the Uber drivers and things like that, to basically build bridges between the civil society on one side and the government on the other.
Yeah. As an outsider, Glen, what do you sort of see as this sort of experiment? Do you think there's something about Taiwan that makes it unique that perhaps we wouldn't be able to see it in other parts of the world?
You know, a lot of people say that the reason why industrialism started in the UK was that there was a labor shortage and there was a lot of coal hanging around, right? And I think, you know, Taiwan is a little bit something similar. This is a place, half of the economy is the export of digital technology, right? It's the most digital economy in the world, more than twice as much even as Israel. And at the same time, its whole identity is democracy, right? If Taiwan is not a democracy, you know, it just becomes another piece of real estate or something like that, right? And so the Taiwan had to make lemonade from those lemons of the conflict between technology and democracy. It had no choice. It was an existential opportunity for the country. And so that's a great thing that we can all benefit from, right? The same way that industrialism started in the UK, but it spread everywhere else. I think Australia's done all right with elements of this as well. I think, you know, while things started in Taiwan, we've actually seen maybe the most exciting stuff that's happening right now is in Japan. They're really perfecting it and scaling it. They don't have that burning need, but they do have that discipline and that focus to make it something that can really transform a whole country even more than in Taiwan. And so that's really what I think. I think it was developed in Taiwan, but maybe it can be perfected and scaled in places like Australia, perhaps.
Yeah. You're like head of your research, employed for Microsoft Research as specialising in plural technologies, Glen. And you've co-written a book on plurality. A bit tongue-tied, I'm afraid. Can you, for the uninitiated, could both of you sort of talk about it and what it is, you know, like for the non-tech heads like me out there?
Sure. Plurality, which you can find in plurality.net, is a free open source public domain book. Feel free to take a few chapters and call it your book. It's all fine. It's co-created with more than 60 people around the world, practitioners that use technology to bridge together diversity. So that is the definition of plurality. This technologies for collaborative diversity.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it is, you know, it used to be that when we saw fire coming from the ground, we put it out. And now we drill for oil underneath it, right? And I think in the same way, when we see social conflict, what plurality tries to teach us how to do is, rather than just putting it out, we should harness the energy underneath it. The same energy of conflict that can sell advertisements can also come up with laws that make the society hold together, that make it more resilient against foreign influence, that make it stronger. And plurality is just trying to give us digital tools, is trying to say the point of these digital tools is to enable us to deal with all the complexity of our modern societies so that we can harness our diversity in order to create progress, growth, beauty, strength.
Do we feel, though, it's a bit of an uphill struggle? I mean, we talk a lot about how big tech is part of our lives, you know, through things here. I've got local examples here in Australia. You know, we've got this situation where Meta is cutting off funding for Australian media outlets. We're seeing the bin fire that Elon Musk's X at the moment. The UK with the sort of the riots there sort of being whipped up through social media and stuff like that, misinformation on social media. Is it possible to change, to bring this sort of bridging together as you talk about, or is there a real worry that we have maybe left it too late?
Yeah. The way I think about this is that there's public square that is both offline but also online. And if you use the likes of Facebook or whatever as the public square, that is a misuse of that property because it was not designed with the logic of getting people closer to each other. It is designed with the logic of just amplifying the short-term reactions, the addictions and things like that. And it is part of that algorithm. And so in Taiwan, we very carefully design pro-social social media, algorithm that identify the differences in opinions, but also just uplift the voices, the bridge-making statements that brings people together. One very quick example. What we did a few months ago in March, when we tried to figure out how to deal with this deepfake or whatever AI synthetic media issue on social media, instead of doing this top-down mandate, we just sent 200,000 SMS to random numbers in Taiwan. And from 111, which is the official number, so people know it doesn't come from a scam or something like that. And within it, a very simple question: how do you feel about information integrity online? It is always easier to ask for people's feelings instead of asking for policy suggestions or things like that. And then we can very easily take a group selfie about how people feel about it. And then from there, we chose randomly 500 people among different age, different gender, different ethnicity, place they live, and so on, so that it forms a microcosm, a mini public that statistically represents the Taiwanese society. And then the 450 that actually showed up talked among themselves. For an entire day, we pay them $70 US or so for the efforts in rooms of 10. So it's called a deliberative polling. And the great thing about current day of language model and AI is that the room facilitates itself. It's not a human facilitator. The room reminds people to speak up if they've been too quiet and so on. And also there's this constant transcript, this selfie that's going around that shows the group the divisions, the highlights of the common ground, and also across the 45 rooms, what are the emerging seeds of ideas that can be combined together. For example, people do not want to regulate on the content layer, but people can feel that we should require like digital signatures so that when celebrities authenticate, their likeness for advertisement, that's fine. But if a social media company does not secure such signatures and somebody get conned for $1 million, then the social media company should be liable for that $1 million. And that's like 3 different ideas from 3 different rooms, but language model nowadays can synthesize them in real time and read out back to the people in the plenary. So this is one of the very concrete example now has resulted in the new anti-fraud law that has passed already, the Taiwanese parliament, with minimal fanfare. So there's no like back and forth freedom of expression or was it of censorship or things like that, because the exact pathway toward this common understanding is co-created with the people, not just for the people.
So find a consensus that way.
A little bit, yes.
Yeah. From an Australian perspective, when we talk about Taiwan, unfortunately, we probably dwell too much on about your neighbour across the straits. You have a lot of one of the big things though Taiwan's affected by with China is disinformation campaigns and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about how Taiwan is sort of combating disinformation with fact checkers and things?
Certainly. So FIMI, which is Foreign Information Manipulation and Interference, in Taiwan are like strongly called out by the national security, by the think tanks that works with them, and so on. And we make a distinction between FIMI, which is foreign in nature, versus like misinformation, which is domestic in nature. This delineation is important because otherwise if you mix them together into a very ambiguous word like fake news or whatever, then it creates confusion all over the society, and people start accusing each other, as foreign agents, and we don't want that world, right? So the FIMI part is taken care of by this strong monitoring, attribution, and so on. But the everyday misinformation part is taken by the grassroots community of collaborative fact-checking, or COFACTs. COFACTs is one of those open source projects started by the GovZero community, but now there's an ecosystem of easily dozens of people in the ecosystem. The way it works is very simple. Just like you can flag incoming email as spam, you can also flag incoming messages in your end-to-end encrypted chat groups. In Taiwan, it's usually Line. You can long tap it and report it as potential mis or disinformation. And then we have a trending dashboard of sorts of what things are trending. And then the community already trained a language model that compares this with all the previous ones that has been reported and corrected to offer this rapid response by an AI model. But adding to that, anyone can add, like Wikipedia, more pieces of information to show the context, to show the balancing reports, and so on. And then the international fact-checking network, like Taiwan Fact Check Center, Michael Penn, and so on, look at those crowdsourced ideas, crowdsourced context, and very quickly and rapidly get the clarification out. Now, us in the ministry, when I serve as digital minister, like leading up to the January election, we're all required to respond within 60 minutes when anything trending that relates to our ministry happens. The reason why is because while we can pre-bunk a lot of those polarization attacks, like ones around election rigging or whatever deepfakes, we can pre-bunk those. Many of these we could not anticipate, but if we get the response out through this grassroots network within 1 hour, then for most people, they actually see the clarification first before they see the disinformation. And so it's still pre-bunking, because research shows that pre-bunking works reliably much better than debunking. And when the younger people, people in their 14s, 15s, as part of civics class, as part of their media competence class, we changed the curriculum so we don't talk about media literacy anymore, we talk about media competence, which is instead of consuming, you co-produce media, you think like a journalist basically, and then we find that this process of contributing to the context inoculates a young mind. If you have thought in a way that journalists have thought, then your mind become immune, essentially, to those very cheap polarization attacks. And then they influence their parents and grandparents. And so, long story short, now we have an ecosystem that you can just install those anti-phishing, anti-scam, anti-fraud tools from any of the leading antivirus companies or things like that. And they all share the same database that provides the immune system that allows us to counter those polarization attacks without administrative takedowns. So Taiwan remains the most free of all the Asian countries as rated by Freedom on the Net report by Freedom House.
I'll just come to Glen in a moment about this, but how can you give us a sense of just how much disinformation there is from China in Taiwan? I mean, how are you bombarded with it on a daily basis, hourly basis? What's it sort of?
Well, I mean, according to the VDEM report, we're the top target anywhere in the world in the past 11 years. So I encourage you to check out the VDEM report for yourself. But also there's just this grand meta narrative, which is democracy only leads to chaos, or democracy never delivers. Like every year there's different variations of this meta narrative. So the way to pre-bunk it is not to do tactical combat, but rather strategically show that we can advance democracy. So it's not just one vote every 4 years. It is not one of those ceremonies that you do in a low bandwidth, high latency way, but rather continuously through citizens' initiatives, through presidential hackathon, through participatory budgeting, through collaborative fact-checking. Everybody can feel they're part of democracy. And according to ICCS, the International Civics and Citizen Standard Report. Now the Taiwanese students are top of the world when it comes to the agency they feel as civic participants. Maybe by the time they're 18, they drop a little bit in their participation because they have other things to do. But the younger people absolutely are setting the agenda and also setting the initiatives for the societal response to polarization attacks.
You must look on with envy, Glen, as an American, given the state of political discourse in the US. I mean, how do you sort of see how we tackle disinformation moving forward?
Well, you know, there's a great paper that I love from 2014 by some political scientists, which showed that the main way that the information ecosystem works in China is not censorship, it's polarization attacks. Anytime there is a nascent social movement or something that might be threatening, they inject some kind of hate into the community so that the community gets distracted and falls apart in argument against each other. And you know, that was 2013, they were studying the early part, but that was a tactic that clearly authoritarians around the world learned and have injected around the world to try to tear apart the ability of democratic countries to stand together, to collectively act against the aims of authoritarians. And that has had quite a bit of success in the United States, fundamentally because unless we insist on cybersecurity, we don't get it. You know, back in the 1990s, Microsoft was scaling, my usual employer was scaling very fast, but they weren't focused on cybersecurity. They were focused on growing as fast as they can, and that ran into real problems for them. We established a whole trustworthy computing practice, and we really tried to get our house more in order. And that clearly hasn't happened in the social media world. They've been now, for many years, under assault that's trying to use these polarization attacks to undermine the efficacy of democracies. And it needs to be treated like any other cyber resilience. And the solution, as Taiwan has showed, is not censorship or whatever. It's building architectures for these systems that are resilient, and we're starting to do it. And in fact, within most of these large companies, there are efforts to do this. There's something called X Community Notes that's based on the Taiwanese combination of their COFAX ecosystem and their vTaiwan system, that now 100 million people see context provided by Community Notes on X every day. And it uses just the same principles. It's not censorship. It's, you know, promoted by Elon Musk, who's free speech absolutist. But it doesn't get the investment or the attention that it needs because there's so much polarization itself within the, like, tech is good, tech is bad, you know, accelerator, brake, rather than steering wheel, which is what we need, right? And luckily, folks within Google are doing this. There's now a version for YouTube. We need to get to those efforts, get to the things that are going on within the tech world that are doing the things that we need. We need to uplift them. We need to energize them. We need to encourage the companies, tell them that they will win the points with the public for doing the right thing, rather than just screaming, tech is bad, tech is good. You know, that argument doesn't move us forward. What moves us forward is the ability to find the things that actually uplift our societies, that bring them together, invest in them together as the public sector, as the private sector, as the civil sector, and build a more resilient democratic ecosystem so that democracy is more attractive than top-down control.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Glen. And I'm going to turn to some questions from the floor now. And our first question is Paul Karp.
Paul Karp from The Guardian. Thanks very much for the conversation. Social media platforms can be politically agnostic. You know, you can organise anti-racists or racists on social media. You can organise climate activists or global heating deniers. Sometimes the platforms themselves also tip the scales by deplatforming supporters and fundraisers for one side of a democratic choice. So I just want to pick up the point about a steering wheel and ask, please, what regulators in a country like Australia can do to ensure that those platforms are more often a force for good?
Yeah. So partly, as I mentioned, Taiwan already passed a set of anti-fraud acts that demands more like not giving bots the freedom of reach that we afford humans and things like that. So that's a good start. And also the other thing is to look at the recommendation algorithm, the For You feed, the virality algorithm, because there's one thing about sorting the people you follow and just by the dates they post. There's another thing altogether to show you the people you don't follow, but the algorithm thinks that you may want. This part is much more editorial. It's much more curational. And so I think there is a lot to be said about making transparent this part of algorithm and also making sure that it can sort based on the societal norms. There's now research that shows if you sort this feed based on the curiosity, constructiveness, and so on, then you actually promote this pro-social conversations among people who don't usually share the same views to come to agreement, at least on the basic facts, which is a very good thing for a democratic society. But if you flip that sign around and just maximize short-term engagement, then people get to the point where they don't even agree on the common knowledge or facts, right? And so this can be quantified. You can measure the harm caused by the different recommendation algorithms. You can even go a step further and say that social media companies must like instant message companies in the European Union, where they have to interoperate with each other, thanks to the Digital Markets Act. So there's also one possibility to say, you have to separate the publication layer with the curation layer so that you can actually let people bring their own curation algorithms. And so if they do that, then of course the platform would not be liable for that particular curation algorithm that this community co-creates. And so there's a lot of nuance to go into this, but the main thing I just want to highlight is that if a platform pushes people you don't follow's content to you, they're actually the co-publisher here. They're actually the co-editor here.
Thank you. The next question is from Simon Gross.
Hello, Simon Gross from Canberra IQ. This session's been a bit surreal so far and disappointing.
Wow.
You've done a lot of talky, feel-goody stuff, but you haven't actually explained anything. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to drill down. I had a look on your website and found quadratic voting. And this is to, it aims to mitigate the tyranny of the majority. I'll just read one section. Each voter gets voice credits, convert to counted votes according to their square root. So if you put one voice credit on an issue, that's one vote. 4 credits are 2 votes, 9 credits are 3 votes, and so on. So, 2-part question. What's the problem with the tyranny of the majority? And how would this quadratic voting system integrate with first past the post, preferential and proportional voting systems?
First, I just want to thank you for pressing us, giving us the opportunity to explain more about things. Not everyone wants to dig into the gory details as much as you've invited us to do, so I really appreciate that.
Gory details.
Yeah, so that's great. Quadratic voting is really, and Audrey can tell you a little bit about how it's been used, but quadratic voting is really just one of a range of systems that has a very basic goal: to create ways of voting that allow a more consensual choice and at the same time allow more participation. So you think about, without preferential voting or anything like that, first past the post rules, you end up with 2 parties. And these 2 parties are a very limited set of options, often very polarized against each other, because everyone's forced to choose one of the 2 to keep the other one out. And so you don't get to see the diversity of opinion, and the choice is like you get 51% and then you smash the other one,
Well, the very recent UK election, Labor was elected with a very strong majority with about 36% of the vote.
Yeah.
And there's quite a few minor parties, so I don't think it's that simple.
So, I mean, as you noted, in the UK system, you can end up with a very small margin changing, the power in a quite radical way, which is a way of kind of making a lot of people feel that they've been left out of the decision. Just to give you an example of an alternative, there's something called approval voting, which is a system where rather than just voting for one candidate, you can vote for as many as you want. And what that ends up usually meaning is the elected candidate has quite strong consensus on them, but also lots more candidates can run because they're not worried about distracting from those main candidates. Quadratic voting takes that one step further. It says you have a bank of credits, you can vote in favor of or against candidates, and what that ends up meaning is that everyone can express, well, I like this one a little bit, and this one I really don't like, but this one I like. So you get these very nuanced expressions, and what that ends up meaning is that usually almost everyone felt like they've kind of won, because almost always the ones that get in are ones that people at least a bit in favor of, not too against, et cetera. And quadratic voting does it in a very specific way, which is that it gets increasingly expensive, as you noted, to vote for a candidate, which moderates extremism. So if you want to express a strong opinion, you can, but it becomes increasingly expensive. And Audrey can talk about how this worked out.
A couple of minutes to share. Since 2018, Taiwan every year has been using quadratic voting in presidential hackathon. And that is not voting for people. It is voting for infrastructure projects. So people propose the digital infrastructure budgets that benefits their local place, and they do prototypes and so on. Every year there's like 200 projects. And what it happens is that you get a link from your friends saying, vote for me in this quadratic voting. You get into the website and you get 99 points. And you start voting for your friends' projects like everybody would do. And then you quickly found that one vote costs 1 point, 2 votes 4 points, and so on. So with 99 points, the most you can do is vote for 9 votes, which costs 81. And then you still have 18 left. Nobody wants to squander that 18. So people look at the second project, maybe in synergy with the other project, and then vote for, which is 16, and you still have 2 points left. Nobody wants to squander that. So on average, people start looking at 4 different projects and evaluate their synergy, and maybe they take some of those 9 back, and maybe they do a 7 and 7, maybe they spread it out, and so on. So the point of quadratic voting is that at the end of the day, everybody feels they have won, because the project that made to the top 20 gets a lot of votes, maybe just 1 or 2, from a lot more people, and also it is a group selfie. A group selfie means that it shows the other 180 projects which of the top 20 has the most synergy with them. So they can kind of recombine their efforts with the top 20 until they get into the national infrastructure level, which is winning the presidential hackathon. So this is one very small illustration to show how this kind of mechanism design can let everybody feel they have won the vote, and also to promote synergy, not just zero-sum competition between the projects.
Have you tried using AI to work out how that system could be gamed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. There's actually a lot of game theory research into that, on collusion and on things like that. And so we talk about
improving the system since then, and there have been many iterations. It's used to channel hundreds of millions of dollars of funds to open source software and other infrastructure these days, and there's been continuous improvement as we've seen the challenges that arise from different game theoretic models, and so it's a very active area of development and research.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Every kid gets a prize, it sounds like. Our next question is from Dan Holmes.
Hi, thank you. Dan from the Mandarin. This question is primarily for Audrey, but I'm very happy for you to weigh in as well, Glenn. I'm interested in the way that you've structured your staff. We primarily cover the public sector, and when I spoke with some of my friends in the public sector about you, they were very interested in how you'd managed to run a department with a flat hierarchy. I think the Australian public service really likes hierarchies, and it really likes silos. So is it possible, and how did you do it?
Thank you, yeah. So in 2016, when I first entered the cabinet, there's a horizontal network called participation offices. So offices embedded in each and every ministry, usually overseeing their communication teams, but then also in charge of building teams that does broad listening, not just broadcasting, because too much of those comms teams are about broadcasting, right? And so aimed with the mandate to not just answer for the citizen initiatives, participatory budgeting, or things like that, but also devising new ways to work across ministries on a more coherent, holistic comms strategy. These people are empowered So they still report to their original ministers, but then they also, in a sense, report to each other, right? So my office at the time, the Public Digital Innovation Space, accepts the comments from each ministry, but only one person at a time, so that each one that joins adds a new perspective, but there's no dominating perspective in the office. And the great thing about this is that usually by the time they rotate back, they have tackled one of those large interagency issues, and of course get a quicker promotion. And so the point here is that to build incentives where the career public service can safely experiment with new ideas of policymaking, of listening to the public without spending their own kind of political or career capital. And then if it doesn't work, there's other participation officers to kind of back them up. And if it does work, then it elevates their status. So together, the PDIS supported them much more than just this horizontal system. The entire systems of Presidential Hackathon, the National One-Stop Shop Participation Platform, and so on, were all created there.
And just to say, I have a not so dissimilar experience because I worked in the office of the CTO at Microsoft. And Microsoft might sound like a private corporation, but it has a large number of employees and has a lot of similarities to a public service, a lot of silo issues. There's a funny XKCD cartoon that you can go look at of different parts of the Microsoft organization shooting guns at each other. You know, our key challenge in the office of the CTO was how to find people with real knowledge of the different business units, but who wanted to work together on building common infrastructure that was needed for the company as a whole. And to help facilitate that, we've actually worked on a formal system like this that uses some of the methods like quadratic funding and quadratic voting, but not with money, with an internal currency for the organization that represents a notion of authority within the organization, but then allows you to do common projects that are not dependent on being in the same hierarchy, being in the same silo, but are instead dependent on your ability to sort of crowdfund the support to go and spend your time on one of these cross-cutting initiatives. And maybe that's something that has something to offer to how to think past hierarchy within the public services. So.
I think one of the concerns people have about that is how you draw lines of accountability when things go wrong. So, I mean, we don't like to talk about it, but sometimes people do the wrong thing and sometimes they do it deliberately. When you've got a flat hierarchy, how do you decide who's left holding the bag?
Yeah, in design thinking terms, what the public digital innovation space does is always in the first diamond. So the idea is that before you run into developing solutions and delivering those solutions or policies, you can have another diamond in front of it that collectively discovers what people feel about this issue. And then you can collectively define the important values that people sometimes don't say out loud, sometimes don't articulate. You can map out the journey and so on. So when it comes to collectively discovery, the kind of group selfie that I talk about, there can be no wrong, right? If you hold the space well, if it doesn't explode, of course, that's one of the failure modes. But if you go to the join.gov.tw platform, we've run hundreds of those collaboration meetings, not one of which explode. So the Career Public Service now see this as a low-risk, time-saving way to map out the stakeholder sentiments, or if this is a sortition, like a random stratified sampling, the entire society's sentiments along qualitative lines. And so by saying that we're just assisting and augmenting the legislature, not jumping to replacing the legislature, like forcing a referendum or anything like that, the accountability is still very clear, because what it does is it crowdsources the agenda. Whether it's quadratic voting and funding, whether it's polis, whether it's something like that, at the end of the day, it is a list of agenda that people widely agree with. But what to do with this and the explicit policies that are designed, that is still within the Career Public Service and also the ministers. So the accountability line is very simple. We're just making sure the two diamonds kind of fit better together.
Makes perfect sense. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Next question from Emma Myers.
Hi, I'm Emma from the CBAA, and my question is in relation to AI and Meta's influence over society and online communities. how can governments implement strategies and laws that successfully tackle the threat posed by continuously evolving technology?
That's a great question. In Taiwan, we have run a set of alignment assemblies. Alignment just means steering AI toward where people want to get people's expectations or norms around the use of AI. And the good thing about this generation of language models is that if you say to it very clearly that this is how our society wants you to behave, and this is the set of kind of curriculum of our local culture and so on that you must read before integrating to our society, they can do this kind of fine-tuning and character tuning, these are technical words, to align an AI so that it fits into the society better. And so in Taiwan, we have been doing that with the help of our private sector, but also our science ministry and academia, to take what's called open models that has the open weight. Nowadays, it is at the same or very similar capability as the proprietary models now. And then we take those models and align it to the local norm, to the local culture, especially because Taiwan have 20 national languages, including the sign language, and 16 of which Austronesian indigenous with 42 language variations. It is very important that the AI does not require these cultures to simply translate to English and back in order to understand what their culture is. We need to honor their culture and their traditions. And so far, the working way here is to run those alignment assemblies. And I'm part of the Collective Intelligence Project, CIP.org, that has this entire pipeline of how to run such open source collective intelligence to align AI to the local norms.
And just to give a sense, this goes well beyond just Taiwan. So, for example, perhaps the leading AI model today is something called Claude 3. And the constitution for Claude 3 was sourced through this process as led by the Collective Intelligence Project. The original constitution they put in had a number of considerations, but it completely left out the issue of disability. So it assumed in all of its responses to things that everyone was navigating the world in the same way. And one of the things that the people across political lines, across demographic lines, all thought was very important to be included in this constitution was that it adapted to the reality that not everyone navigates the world similarly. And so the new constitution is actually very thoughtful about this because of the process of including the people in commenting on it.
I'll get asked bluntly, how scared should the world be of AI? And how much should it be prepared to embrace it?
Well, that depends on what do you mean by AI, right? I'm always insisting that AI work with the society as assistive intelligence. Assistive means that it's transparent, and also it's like enhancing the dignity of the people so that I can see you better. But this assistive technology does not replace you or replace me or replace anyone, really. So this is something that facilitates better understanding, better communication between real people. And if we use AI in an assistive role or use it to augment collective intelligence, as we have talked about, then always it is steerable. If there is bias, if there is things that go wrong and so on, if it's not in a kind of autonomous authoritarian role, then there's always a way for us to steer it back so that we can retune the AI so that it fits it better, so that I can see you in a non-blurry way and so on. And so the most important thing here is that the way it works needs to be explainable, transparent, and steerable to the people that are affected by AI. So it is not just because it's called AI, so that it can be, exceptions from the usual laws and regulations and norms that demands this kind of steerability. It cannot be just because it's deep learning, so it is exempt because we cannot explain it anyway. So we do not need to accept those excuses. We should demand the same kind of accountability measures and so on that we demand of any other more assistive or augmenting technologies.
Yeah, I think a contrast between Japan and the US really stands in my mind when I think about this. At the Museum of Science in Boston, we're very proud we have these Boston Dynamics dogs. I don't know if you've ever seen them. They're little robot dogs. And these robot dogs, they do tricks, they charge at you, they do all kinds of things to show off how smart the AI is. And that's the main point. I mean, what exactly else they're supposed to be doing, not totally clear. You go to Muraikon, the Japanese Museum of Emerging Technology and Innovation, and the director of the museum, Miyakawa Chieko, she's a blind woman who used to be an IBM fellow. She walks around with a suitcase that looks like she's just come from the airport, but the suitcase perceives the area around her, gives all the haptic feedback you would get from a full sweep of using a walking stick, and gives it all to her in her hands in a way that no one sees, that gives her far more awareness without any perception that she's doing anything other than coming from the airport. And that sort of thing that enhances the dignity of the person who uses it rather than challenging or humiliating or intimidating or showing off as technology, I think is what we should embrace. And should we be scared of the other thing? Well, it's meant to scare us. Maybe we shouldn't be scared of it, but we shouldn't let it scare us. We should just laugh at it and say, those stupid technologists, why are they building that thing? Let's do something that works a lot better.
Yeah. E-Rover. No need for E-Rover. Our next question from Maurice Riley.
This is actually from Tim Shaw, one of our former directors. Question for Audrey. He says, and he loves political campaigns, as he's chomping on his sandwich there in Sydney. His question is, of the 200,000 text messages, what percentage of recipients opted out of participating in the campaign?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we sent out in 2 batches. The first 100,000, I believe, only had around like 10,000, 20,000 or so that wanted to participate. The second message, exactly the same, but with the added text that we're paying you $70 for your time to participate in the deliberation, has far more uptakes.
So money wins. Yeah.
It helps to compensate people for
My
their time.
question is, we had David Sanger, the New York Times national security correspondent, speak here recently, and he reminded us about the history of technology and information, where the Americans had a view that, well, as did the West, that once the internet and more information came available in mainland China, this would, help democratise that country. And of course, what we have seen is quite the reverse. Is that it just shows that China has been able to control information. So do you think they've got a much better, sophisticated sense of using digital technologies than perhaps we do in the West?
I mean, there are ways to make the people transparent to the state through surveillance. There are ways to make the state transparent to the people through the kind of participatory technology we just talked about. At the end of the day, they're all just digital technologies, but in completely different directions. In Taiwan, we do believe that when the people understand the why and the how of policymaking, they work like journalists do to discover what really is happening and what are the pathways to make what's currently happening and the collective wish of the people, how to bridge those two. And this only happens if the way government works is transparent to the society across different disciplines, across different cultures and things like that. So I don't think there's a kind of direct comparison between these two models. It's almost like racing toward opposite direction and say who runs faster. I'm not exactly sure how to compare these two, but we're committed on this particular direction.
I mean, there's an expression in the United States, freedom isn't free. And, when radio first came in, people came to the conclusion that it was supporting fascism. And polarization was actually higher than it is now during the 1930s. And then there was something called the Hutchins Commission that some may know about that reformed U.S. media through a combination of government and mostly corporate responsibility, and said, look, to have a free press, we have to have some basic principles. We have to have balance. People need to see all the different perspectives. And we need that what we report as news bridges those perspectives. And that sort of public spirit, that sort of public investment is necessary if you're going to have free media. And that's why the U.S. invested in things like Radio Free Asia and so forth. So I don't think it should be any surprise to us at all that if we're not going to make public-spirited decisions and public investment, that we're somehow going to get for free free internet. Free internet comes from public investment. And in fact, the U.S. pioneered that. That's why we invested in creating the internet in the first place. The U.S. public sector did that, not just private business. Private business would have given you AT&T forever. So look, we just need to remember the ancient truths, which is that you only get a free society if free people are willing to come together and invest in preserving freedom collectively.
Okay, thank you.
I think our final question today will be from Peter Lewis.
Thanks, Peter Lewis with Per Capita. So, Guardian Essential report this week had two really interesting stats, which I'll get you to reflect on, Audrey. The first is the only group in society that people think are heard by government are big business, and also that 50% of people said they've never engaged in government themselves at all. So I'm interested firstly in your radical transparency with big business and lobbyists, and then finally maybe some reflections on what it takes to get people more involved in the democratic process.
Thank you. During my tenure as minister, which is 7.5 years, I have this policy that the lobbyists who visit me need to agree to publish the transcript free of copyright 10 working days after the meeting, or sometimes it's televised also, but like today, but usually it's in the terms of a transcript. And so during those 10 working days, they can take out, trade secrets or things like that, but they cannot modify, what I said. In some extreme cases, like in my dialogue with Microsoft senior leadership team, everything was redacted on their part, but you can still see what I have said on my part is on the Say It platform. But the great thing is that no matter how much redaction they did after the fact, people all just lobby for future generations, for sustainability, for the common good, for everything that is good, because people know that the future generation is watching, right? And so I think this kind of radical transparency, especially around the time when the trust was just 9%, or 10% or 11% when I joined in, that really helped. That really helped to instill this kind of mutual accountability so that people understand the policymaking process. So this is the first thing. And the second thing is that the participation does not need to be very expensive. I think the reason why people feel that it may be very expensive to get to one of those town halls, consultations, or things like that was just that because there is no very easy way to just join a citizens initiative by adding your vote or just calling a toll-free number to speak your mind or things like that. But these are all very inexpensive ways that not just national government, but also local governments or even people who run for the governor election can very easily do nowadays to do, again, broad listening, to lower the threshold of citizen participation so that more and more people feel included and their voices reflected.
Thank you very much for that. And everyone, thank you for your time today, Audrey Tang and Glen Weyl. Please, everyone, thank you. Now, everyone who speaks at the press club doesn't go away empty-handed. You've got a membership, so next time you're down here, perhaps on your next book tour, feel free to swing by again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.